the Day podcast with my parents, Clark and Bobby. We'll talk about the Bible and the Holy Spirit adventures. Thanks for listening.
Colossians 1, starting a new book.
Yeah.
And what's cool about this, I love when the Holy Spirit does this. Sometimes, like in couples ministry, we'd have a conversation in the couples class, and then we'd go to church, and the sermon would be about the exact same thing. You're like, Holy Spirit, thank you.
Right.
Thanks for laid it on us twice today. Like, we needed to hear this. And that's what happened. We're looking at Colossians 1. This is going to be one of the primary passages I'm preaching out of Sunday, actually. And so it's all about like the supremacy of God. He's the big dog, number uno.
I'll go.
The supremacy of Christ.
No, that's kind of a big word. That's what stuck out to me. Really, you're going to be encouraged in Colossians 1, wherever you find yourself camping. There's a really beautiful prayer too, starting in verse 9, I think, or verse 10. But what stuck out to me today started actually in verse 15, and it goes all the way down to verse 22. And it talks about kind of the supremacy, the identity of the Son of God. And this section of verses has long been important to me, just because of what it says about who Jesus is. And just literally the truth, what Paul's laying out here has thought to have been maybe some kind of hymn or something from the church of Colossae. And he just breaks it down saying, this is who Jesus is, the Son of the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all of creation. And why even just those sentences right there hold such weight and such power, the Son of the image of the invisible God, because that is, we can't see and we don't know for sure what God looks like. And he became flesh and came to earth. And that way we could make sense a little bit of Yahweh, of this eternal God. And so grateful for that. And then even the firstborn over all creation, we could break down every single verse and word just with the weight of all this. But that I'll just give you a little tidbit too. Why that's so important isn't because Jesus was the firstborn on the earth, but because he is literally the heir. He represents the heir, and how we now...
Air as in H-E-I-R, not Air Jordan, A-I-R.
Good distinction.
Yeah.
Anyway, so now we're co-heirs with him because of what he's done on the cross. And so just a really, really, really powerful set of verses here that talk about the true identity of Jesus Christ and the power that he has. And
some of the words that keep popping up in there is reconciliation.
Yep. And so when you transition down to the end of the chapter, one of the things we learn about God, if that's one of the questions you're asking, which is often a question we'll ask, what did we learn about God
in this chapter?
Is that he wants to be with us. He did this so we could be reconciled to him.
Yeah. So real quick, reconciled, Bob, that's a word that's thrown out oftentimes. I feel like when there's a broken relationship, when there's forgiveness that needs to be had, what's the difference between like forgiveness and reconciliation?
This is a good question. Thank you for asking, Clark.
You're very welcome.
When we processed this a little bit, we talked about forgiveness can be one-sided. It can be one person. Yeah. And that's a gift from God, because thank goodness, sometimes people have gone into glory or passed away, and there's things we need to work through and forgive. And we can do that within our relationship with the Lord. You brought up too, maybe even someone just moving far away and how you can't really...
you don't have access to them, but you can still experience, you can still forgive them or receive forgiveness from the Lord in your own heart.
Same thing with like maybe something, years ago happened.
So forgiveness...
Great.
Long and short of it is, it's possible with just one person.
And reconciliation, there has to be two parties.
Requires it.
Yeah. And so even, the picture of a bridge was a picture that came up, and how the bridge doesn't go to nowhere. The bridge has to be completed on the other shore. There has to be two sides.
Connects two sides. And we were thinking some just basic sentences in life that we could use.
Yeah.
With the word reconciled. It'd be like...
What were those?
One of them was like finances. Like, I went to the bank and I paid off our loan, and our debt was paid, and now our finances were reconciled. Right. Meaning that us in the bank, we're good.
You're good. Yep. And even like within relationships too, we talked about a husband and wife, and how, Harry and Sally were fighting last night, but they were able to come together and reconcile today. Yeah. Right? Is that one?
Yeah.
So those types of sentences might be helpful just to get a better picture of what reconciliation means. And really then let's dive in to what Paul is trying to say to this church, and what God has done really on
You want to read
his,
verses 19 to 22 for us?
I do. Let me do that. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But because he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation, if you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel.
And I think that's important to notice the language that he uses there. That it's not, is that Cal banging on his door?
Yeah, I'm being summoned. I'll go.
Okay, I'm going to wake up the baby. It's important to pay attention to the language Paul uses here, because it's not saying that humanity reconciles itself to God. It's not saying that humanity earns something from God. It's really clear saying God reconciled humanity to himself. Like it's something that God did. And you think about this calling us enemies. Romans 5:10 calls us enemies, and then we're reconciled to Christ. And then here it talks about how we were alienated, we had evil thoughts, evil behavior, yet still Christ did this incredibly powerful act and this gift that allows us to be reconciled, brought back in, restored, redeemed, rebuilt in our relationship with God. And so that's what he's getting at here, is that through the gospel, through Jesus' gift on the cross, we have this new opportunity before us in our relationship with him. And so in that, we have now the chance to be reconciled to God because of what Jesus Christ has done. That's what he's done. But you also have the opportunity to be reconciled amongst each other, human being to human being. And so I want to read you just a quote. I was talking to the guys in one of my text loops, and I had asked them, have you had any experience with reconciliation? And one of the guys in this group, he's a Christian, obviously loves the Lord. He has a really powerful story. One of the smartest people I know, too. He said, a form of reconciliation that I remember was when I was in high school. As you know, I'm not a big guy. In high school, I was even smaller, a meager 5 foot and less than 100 pounds. It was safe to assume that I was going to get bullied, and I was for most of it. There was one guy whose family life was a mess. His older brother had a lot of issues, tried to take his own life many different times. It was very sad. They were adopted by a lesbian couple. They were beaten and abused, and it was just a really hard life that he had. So he took much of his anger and his frustration out on me. And as the few friends we had some mutual friends. We were just kind of always around each other. There were days I would come home with bruises. I was only 15. I had no idea what to do. When we got to our junior year, we had mostly distanced ourselves. But I could see in his face guilt, confusion, despair in his eyes. One day, the whole squad went to watch a movie. We were both there. He pulled me over to the side, and he asked me for forgiveness. He explained everything to me, his frustration, his anger, his lack of family support, and a whole retinue of personal issues. In the moment, without even thinking, I just forgave him on the spot, no questions asked. He was stunned. Just this little kid, after all the beatings, the insults, the abuse, just to forgive him like that, he was shocked. I told him I was raised to forgive and move past. I knew he needed a positive influence in his broken life. And for the first time I had known him, his face was radiating joy. A burden had been lifted off him. I don't know what he's doing now, but I hope I made a positive impact on him. And I can just testify to this quote and this individual. This person really does love Jesus. They really do. And in that, I'm sure eventually conversations were about to come up where, hey, this is what Jesus Christ has done in this individual's life. Mm-hmm. And that's the only reason why this person could forgive a bully is because of what Christ has done to him. And so what's interesting is that's possible. We're reconciled to God, most importantly, but then we can now have this option of being reconciled to each other because of what Christ has done for us. And I want you to pay attention to what Paul ends with in verse 22. He says that Jesus Christ does this so that we would be without blemish and free from accusations. And I think the reason why Paul includes that in there is because sometimes we struggle with our standing. Like, where am I standing with God? And where am I standing with other people? And sometimes you think back to the past. You probably have regrets, shame and guilt, those kind of things. And
I mean, that's one of the Bible references, the devil, the evil one, as the accuser often too, because we'll like he's constantly pointing back to the time when we were alienated. And even I think Paul talks about this too, the importance of our minds, that we're enemies in your minds, because, you know, our minds, our behavior, you know, we can go back to that type of lifestyle, that way of thinking, and that's where the evil one wants us to go. Yeah. But really, let's focus on this truth today, how we're reconciled and how God's done it all.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Colossians 1.
The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give him his peace. Have a great day.